for attention, fighting for affection. I belong there. You said I belong. Said I'm never let go of your hand, Lord. Never let go of your hand. I'm safe there. Never let go of your hand. I'm safe there. Never let go of your hand. Oh, I'll never let go of your hand. Never let go of your hand. Safe and secure. Never let go of your hand. Safe and secure. Never let go of your hand.
Holding your hand, I won't let it go. I won't let it go. I hold on, got a real good grip. I hold on, got a real good grip. Hold on, I got a real good grip. I won't let go. I will. I know what my peace is, because I know what my restoration is. Oh, the hand of Jesus carries value. The hand of Jesus carries weight. Oh, and Father, I hold on to the weight today. I hold on to the value today. I connect to the hand that has carried me through. I connect to the hand that has walked me through. Lord, you have my promise today. I won't let go. I won't let go. Never let go of your hand, Lord. Never let go of your hand. Never let go of your hand, Lord. Never let go of your hand. Never let go of your hand. Never let go of your hand.
Do you hear us tonight?
Never let go of your hand.
We really mean it, God.
Never let go of your hand.
Can you hear us tonight?
Never let go of your hand.
We really mean it right now.
Never let go of your hand.
Never.
Never let go of your hand. Before I knew my name, before I drew a breath, he was making ways for me. Now and every day, in each and every step, he is making ways for me. When my heart is full of doubt, feels like faith is running out.
All right.
Come too far.
Well,
to
hello, everybody.
turn
My name is Pastor
around.
Dave. I'm one of the pastors here at Liberty Church, and just want to welcome those that are in the room, as well as those that are at home. I feel a little bit like a news reporter. I'm looking into a camera directly. It's a little different, but tonight is our kickoff of Locked in Solidarity. It's part of the CCDA, the Christian Community Development Association. It's an annual thing that they do in February, which is a week-long awareness about mass incarceration. And so we as a church, we believe that it is an important topic. And so for us, we're spending tonight with some awesome panelists that you're going to hear from, as well as our Sunday sermon is also going to be a focus on that. But before jumping in, I just want to give a few thank you shout outs. First, thank you to Liberty Church. I know some of our members are here and some are watching at home. Yeah, sure, you give a... Those watching at home, there's a few hand claps. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you because as a pastor to say, hey, we're going to do this and not have fear of retribution of members being like, why on earth are we talking about mass incarceration? To have the honor to lead you with Pastor Felipe and the grace that you've shown in loving God and loving people is just so important. And so that's why we're doing this tonight. I also want to thank each and every one of my panelists for spending the time with us tonight. And then last, I just get to sit up here, look pretty, and ask a few questions. But shout out to our tech team. They've been here for a few hours getting everything ready with all the cameras. So Pastor Felipe, Pastor Max, Mark, making it work so that those at home can hear. Just so appreciative to each and every one of you. If this is your first time connecting with Liberty Church, whether in this room or at home, we have a mission statement, which is that we exist to be a multicultural gospel expression where we experience God, reconcile all people to God, and where we engage the community. And so this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we do and why we do it. We live this mission out in all that we do. But for those that are watching at home, feel free to engage. You can like, you can comment. If you have a question that you want to ask our panelists, we're going to have some time. I have Pastor Felipe. He's going to be texting me all the questions, so feel free to drop a question. But I wanted to start off with a little bit of framing that I think is so important, which is, first, what is tonight not about? Tonight is not about coming up with a one-step solution to fix mass incarceration, right? We realize it is a far more complex issue. It's intertwined and it's baked into the fabric of our country. And so we're not here to propose a one-step fix-all solution. It's also not an anti-police or anti-correction officer conversation. And it's also not an anti-prison and rule of law, right? We all want laws that we live by and abide by, and we're not saying, hey, we just have to knock down every prison and everybody fend for themselves. But there is an issue, and we're going to see that statistically, and so that's why we're addressing it tonight. So what is tonight about? It's about listening and learning. Hopefully some of you are able to walk away with maybe some newfound knowledge, maybe a new heartbeat for this topic. I know the moment that I started to learn about it, I felt such a heavy conviction, and so that's why I find it so important to talk about. And then for us, it's about living out our Christ-like motivation. The scriptures call us to this, right? It's not just a hot-button issue that we want to talk about. Hebrews actually tells us in Hebrews 13, 1-3, it says this: keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison, as if you were there together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves are suffering. It doesn't say to look after them once they get out, look after them once they've turned their life around. It says to remember those who are actually in prison. And so I just want to share a couple quick stats, and then I'm going to stop talking and hand it off to my awesome panel here to share on the topic. But why are we actually here tonight? The Equal Justice Initiative has some of these stats right on their website. You can check it out. 25%. I want you to remember that number. That is how much we account for in terms of the global population of incarcerated people. And yet, America is only 5% of the global population. So we make up 5% of the population, but we have 25% of the world's incarcerated behind bars in America. 87 billion. 87 billion is how much we spend on jails and prisons each and every year. We don't got money to fund our schools because we're spending it on jails and prisons. 2.2 million. That is the total number of those that are incarcerated in America right now. That's a growth from 200,000 in 1972. And 750%. That's the increase of women who are incarcerated. This isn't just a male-dominated issue. It affects men and women. Here's the lifetime likelihood of someone ending up in prison. If you're a black man in America, it's a 1 in 3 chance. If you're a Hispanic man, it's a 1 in 6 chance. If you're a little bit paler like me and you're white, it's a 1 in 17 chance. That's for men. If it's for women, 1 in 18 if you're a black woman, 1 in 45 if you're a Latina woman, and 1 in 111 if you're a white woman. Those stats are not because we proportionally commit crimes differently. No, stat after stat, study after study says that crime is committed the same amount no matter the ethnicity, and yet we're incarcerating at a much higher rate based on the color of our skin, and some of our panelists are going to be sharing on that tonight. And so we have currently more people in jails, prisons, and detention centers than degree-granting universities and colleges. Think about that. We have more jails, prisons, and detention centers than actual colleges and universities in America. And here's my last stat for us. California, since 1980, they've built 1 university. And in that same amount of time, they've built 22 prisons. It's not a liberal or liberal or conservative issue, Republican or Democrat issue. It's an all of us issue. And so tonight, it's not about planting a political flag. It's about learning and growing together. And so with that, I want to challenge us to once again engage. If you're at home watching, feel free to drop a comment. Share it, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or even on Instagram. Feel free to share it out. But I want to introduce our panelists. Enough talking from me. I'll give you a brief introduction, and then I'd love for you guys to share more about your stories and why it's so important that you guys are here. I'll start with Carlos. Carlos, he's an educator, he's a school social worker, and he's also worked in the Hudson County Correctional Facility as a social worker. So would you just share your story a little bit and why you're here?
Yeah, I'm a school social worker. Prior to being a school social worker, I oversaw a program at the Hudson County Jail, a substance abuse program and mental health program. I worked in halfway houses, county jails, halfway houses again. And while working in the halfway houses and the jails, sometimes I realized I met them too late, so I wanted to try to catch them earlier. And that's what ignited in me a passion to want to get into the school system, to try to be, rather than reacting to what the issues are, try to be proactive and more preventative care. So, so we went from the jail system to the school system. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. And if you come to our church on a Sunday, you could see this beautiful beard in person. Carlos is an elder here at Liberty Church, member. Next up, we got Councilman Frank Educational Gilmore. You might have known him as an advocate for our city. You might know him as a councilman. I'm not exactly sure where your ward begins or ends anymore because they cut up your map. But thank you so much for being here. Can you share a little bit more about your story?
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you for putting this together. This is a much-needed conversation. We need to shed light on the importances of having a conversation on mass incarceration. Like so many individuals who grew up in inner cities in America, being a black African-American male, I fell a victim to the strong grips of mass incarceration. And for me, mass incarceration, it's a multi-fold problem. So it's going to take multi-levels or different types of entities to intervene to address the problem. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this conversation. It is something that is extremely important. And you hit on a little bit about the statistics that 1 in 3 African Americans is going to encounter the criminal justice system. But within that statistic, there is an even darker statistic which we don't take a look at. And that statistic is essentially, it looks at socioeconomical status of those individuals, and it also looks at if the individual comes from a single family versus a dual family household. And when you look at those numbers, it's almost guaranteed that individuals who don't have a dual family household, individuals who are below the socioeconomical ladder, it's almost a guarantee that that individual will encounter the criminal justice system. And that's startling.
Yeah, thank you. It's true. And then it creates a cycle too, because
Yes.
once they're incarcerated, then their kids are affected.
Exactly.
And there's even more statistics too on how many people are currently sitting in a jail right now, not because they're guilty, because in our criminal justice system you're presumed innocent. They're simply sitting there because they don't have the means and the finances to get out. Ahmaud Arbery is I'm sorry, not Ahmaud Arbery. Khalif Browder is a great story of that one.
Yep.
Boris, can you share a little bit about your background and your work with JC Together as well?
Well, I'm currently an lead organizer with Jersey City Together. And what that is that it's a strictly nonpartisan, broad-based organization of more than 50 religious congregations, neighborhood organizations, parent groups, and the likes. And what we do is we challenge ordinary people to identify problems in their communities, in their neighborhoods, and then we connect those individuals and those organizations, and we teach them how to multiply their power and mobilize people by the thousands. And that's a job that I'm very, very proud of, because I like the style of organizing, because we ask people what are the problems, opposed to coming in and just bringing you a solution. And I'm also a returning citizen. I spent 11 years at East Jersey State Prison, and I'm also a college graduate. I have a BA in sociology, I think, a minor in psychology. I've taught courses at Rutgers University, interned at Princeton University. I've been to the Senate, to the Congress, to advocate for education, because that was something that helped me navigate through this tough process of having had that criminal record. Actor, author, playwright, on my second play. And actually all of the things and all my experiences in life, I get a chance to bring them all into those different areas of life. My message is always the same. You know, I'm always trying to raise awareness about not just mass incarcerations, but some of the other social ills that are the behavioral byproducts of mass incarceration and poverty alike, because there's a positive correlation between crime and poverty. And when you're having a conversation about mass incarceration, you have to bring poverty into the room, right? It's not like a rocket science that sometimes poor people would steal, right? And I remember doing this in a lot of places, that if we were to get locked inside of a space, how long before someone takes something that doesn't belong to them, right? It's human nature to try to survive, right? So if we could start working on some of those staggering statistics that you heard Mr. Gilmore and Pastor David talking about, then these are ways in which we could bring down crime in our cities, not just figuring out more ways to lock people up, you know. So that's pretty much who I am and things that I'm interested in.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So I have a few individual questions based on our panelists' background and the work that they do. But if it's not your direct question, feel free to jump in and add to it and contribute to it. So I'd love to start with you, Boris, because I know Jersey City Together has made this a priority recently, and then coronavirus hit. But I know right before COVID hit, you guys had done a lot of research, because it's one thing to hear the national numbers, right? But it hits home a little bit different when we hear from Jersey, right? Because we're a Democratic state. We get this issue, right? It doesn't hit home the same way. That's the middle of America. But the stats are the same in our state, and in some ways a little bit worse. Can you share some of the specifics of what you found through JC Together?
Yes. In 2000, I think it was 18, I came here and started organizing in Jersey City. And because education is such a huge part of my background, I was taken over for an organizer who was organizing around education. And I began having conversation with a lot of the Jersey City residents. And, you know, I would typically ask the question, if there was one thing in your community, what would you change, right, to find an issue to work on? And everybody started talking about mass incarceration or the criminal justice system. So I went back to the lead organizer, Frank McMillan at the time, and I said, Frank, people are talking about mass incarceration. He said, well, that's what you have to organize around. So we started this campaign, so I started to talk to more people. And I believe over that time, we talked to more than a couple of thousand of people, right? And the statistics that we found here in Jersey City were that over 50,000 current Jersey City residents had spent time incarcerated at some point. If we're individuals who cannot imagine that number, that is the size of Yankee Stadium. So imagine filling Yankee Stadium. That's how many people had actually spent time incarcerated at some point. And over 5,000 at the time were currently on parole and probation, and 13,000 residents were currently incarcerated at that time, right? So we're looking at 50,000 people who could not access housing, 50,000 people who could not access jobs. I mean, we're living in this age of criminal reform, but we're talking about this generational curse, right? Right? So even when we talk about slavery, there was a reconstruction period, right? So it took a while to get over the effects of slavery. It took a while to get over the effects of Jim Crow, of not being able to have a house and all of these things, right? So we're still seeing the results of that outside our doors, right? And so while I'm looking at these stats, I realized that all these issues were actually connected to housing, education, and safety, right? And these people were directly impacted by this criminal justice system. And it's made things very, very hard for them to achieve in this social economic way. And so we began to have these conversations, and that's what we were looking at. What are the barriers, right, that'll get you back on track? I remember talking to a woman. I went and sat and talked to a woman. And I said, what are the barriers to keep you from recidivism? She said, well, housing is a big issue for me. I said, well, what would it have been if you had housing? She said, I would have had time. She had got let out of Hudson County Jail almost in the middle of the night with nowhere to go except for somewhere, an abandoned building where she would be received right around her old vices. She didn't have time to come up with another plan, right? And her story was important to me because if we use my story as a narrative, that's not the truth. You know, the truth is that I had opportunities in a space that's considered an opportunity desert. You know, so when you start thinking about we're going to start doing reforms and reconstructions, and I'm trying to figure out when was the system put together right in the first place. So language for me is very problematic, and I sit on the floor with these people. It means that I come from the exact same spaces they came from. I went to 2 different districts. There was 2 different educations in 2 different districts, right? I started out in Piscataway, New Jersey. I moved to New Brunswick, New Jersey. There was concentrated poverty. There was high levels of crimes, and the education system was completely different. And I would often ask myself, if education was the key, right, for upward mobility, then why is this community getting a different key? And what doors could they access with this key? I understood that as a kid. So, you know, when I'm looking at these communities and I go through them, Jersey City wasn't no different from where I grew up. In fact, it felt like home to me, and I had spent 3 years in Hudson County Jail. I was very familiar. It doesn't matter where I go in this country, you're going to find the same social structures whenever you go to an urban space where there are poor black and brown people. And I don't have to find an ideology for that. All we need to agree is that we're willing to work on these disparities.
Definitely, yeah.
And also, just to put in more context, right, how many people have encountered the criminal justice system, that's more people that currently resides in Ward F, 50,000. So that's essentially a whole jurisdiction, right, that have encountered this system. It's mind-boggling, and a lot of things what we don't look at is collateral damage, right? What happens when you remove the father figure or the mother, because there's a huge incarceration problem amongst females. But for the sake of this explanation, what happens when you remove that male figure out of the young man's life? He's disgruntled that his father's not there. He have all levels of anger. He don't know how to express himself. And subsequently, by default, almost to no fault of his own, he's likely to become a statistic. So the collateral damage is a huge component as well.
Yeah, I want to, in addition to what's being said, I was working like I said, working in a halfway house. Either you're halfway back into prison or halfway back into the community, depending on the parole violation. And also working in the county jail in the men and women's program overseeing a program with 40 beds in each. We could provide the treatment, which we did. We provided the employment readiness. We, at times, at the halfway house, even would provide employment through the program. It was a Steps to Enhance Parole Success, a STEPS program. And in treatment, though, one of the things that always came up is, look, I'm getting the therapy I need. I have the job now, but I'm going back home. And that's where the problem is at. I'm going back to the block. I'm going back to exactly where I got locked up at. And when it comes to addiction, we know that no matter where you move, you'll find what you need. No matter where you go to the desert and you'll dig up whatever it is you need to, whatever it is you want. But when he's speaking about the housing, it's a cycle, especially if you're going back to the crack house, if that's where they came out of. Mm-hmm. You know, so I seen it because I've seen people get released and come right back in. It's like, man, but like, what happened? Like, and they'll tell me, man, I just went back home. That's what happened. I went back home. And that's exactly where the problem is at. So I just wanted to add on, like, I seen that, man, and it's unfortunate what people go through just to go back home. What seems to be a joy for some is misery for others. It's a sad thing when people feel safer in penitentiary than doing their own four walls. It's sad, but it's the reality of it. You know, so I'm just agreeing with what you're saying. I've seen it.
And when you think about that, right? There's two things that you said that are very interesting. Like treating addiction, we understand exactly what we're treating. And naming things is very important to me. Because if we could name it, then we can deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. But so for the guys that are in addiction, there's sometimes you find yourself with no programs. Mm-hmm. There's no program for arrested development or the trauma of growing up in poverty, being a kid that walks to school past memorials and understanding that, you know, someone was killed here. So by the time I'm 10, I have to desensitize myself just to be able to walk to the store, else I'm gonna be a mess, right? So then I have all this different emotional trauma, right, that's going on. And but imagine getting out and you have this mark we just signed Juneteenth, right? I actually signed a bill with the governor where they say you can't discriminate against housing now, right? But this just happened. So it's a good thing, but we still have a bunch of people who are still out there in the cold. I can't access an apartment in a safe space. The places that'll rent to me are the places where the landlord may not really care. You know, I don't have access to take my children to a safer space. I have to live here and deal with the behavioral byproducts of poverty, right? I can't have access to putting my children in a better school while we work on policies to improve the schools, right? My children have to attend these schools because this is how it impacts a whole community, and you socially reproduce whatever you're calling as a bad person or criminal or whatever, right? And because of these policies that have been in place. And then imagine that the 96 crime bill, they're just reforming it. But how much of a residual effect do we need to clean up? So we reform it now, but we still got a whole mess that it caused. It's not over. My son died in prison in a fist fight in a cell. So I have to have a grandson without a father. You know, my father was a heroin addict. So what you're seeing the effects generation after generation after generation, right? We have to place our hopes in my grandson. Because 3 generations were destroyed. You know, so when you start to see some people feel like, okay, why we don't just turn this thing around? It's not going to turn around right away. You know, we have to contend with the anxiety of knowing some of our brothers and sisters won't be saved. We don't have the time. And still we have to barrel on and try to figure out how we can salvage the 3rd generation down. That's where we're at today.
Yeah, and I think part of why we're doing this tonight is to remove the stigma and to remove the shame. You know, we think that this is an issue that affects those people sometimes when it's all around us. And I mean, my own wife's family has an uncle locked up, in upstate New York prison, you know what I mean? But it's the hush-hush, we don't talk about it, right? Because that brings shame on our family, and nobody is actually addressing the issues because, well, if we talk about it, then I make my family look bad, So that's part of why we find this thing so important. But you guys are already starting to touch on it, but I guess my next one is for you, Councilman. How does these statistics then affect our communities and our schools? And then I kind of follow up with you, Carlos. How does that affect the school-to-prison pipeline, which we know is very much in place? So bringing it locally, whether you want to look at it from a policy standpoint or just the practicality as a community organizer yourself, with youth, how is this actually affecting us?
Oh, man,
You only got 2 minutes to answer this. I'm just messing with you.
it's crazy. Just think that in some prisons, there's 3 generations of men there. Just let that marinate for a minute. That's a son, a father, and a grandfather. 3 generations that's incarcerated. In one study, they were determining how many prisons are to be built based on 4th grade reading levels. Right? So for me, when I'm talking about, there's a whole group of individuals who I want to advocate for, who's put behind bars, and some of them unjustly. But my biggest focus is on preventative measures. What can we do on the front end to level the playing field for kids growing up in our community? So that's what my primary focus on. And it's no coincidence that I go by the nickname Educational Gilmore, because I credit education with my rehabilitation. And I know wholeheartedly that education will afford you the opportunity to combat almost anything. I never knew that it costs more money to house an inmate in New Jersey than it costs to attend the top university in the state. So, being armed with that at my disposal, I take that as an opportunity to educate and enlighten on the front end. Now, even with all of that education at my disposal, I'm still at a disadvantage because of environmental factors. If you put a kid in the gym with a basketball in his hand and don't show him nothing, and you keep him there for 4 or 5 years, he's going to learn how to play basketball. The environment is fixed so that he learn. Likewise, if you put a kid in a criminal element or where criminality or crime is taking place, by default, they're going to participate in that arena. So when we're looking at preventative measures, I'm looking at front-end intervention. How do we pour in resources on the front end? Because for me, an individual whose father is incarcerated, the likelihood of that child encountering the criminal justice system is drastically high. How do we level the playing field? And we're sitting up here talking about numbers. These are real people. These are people that you can actually, these are real people. And we have to address the inequities as it relates to mass incarceration, because all of the data suggests that black and whites commit crime at or around the same exact rate. So when you see a kid that's African American, 14 or 15, committing a crime, his white counterpart is committing that same crime. But his white counterpart family have the socioeconomical capacity to pay for the intervention, to get the child the best lawyers, to make sure they have the resources, to have mental health evaluations. And that's another animal we didn't even dive into, the mental health perspective of that. I've seen, and I'm an adult, and I'm a college-educated adult, I'm a sitting elected official. I've seen so much violence in my life that when I hear the gunshots, I don't even run. I'll look to see what direction it's coming from. That's how traumatized these kids are. Some kids have lost 4 and 5 relatives before the time they turn 16 years old. There's been a homicide on a particular block almost every single year. These kids are traumatized. I didn't even know that black people went to seek consultation from mental health representatives. I've never seen a psychiatrist, a therapist. I don't even know how to interact with that community. These kids go through so much trauma, and no one is addressing it. Is because in our community, there's a certain stigma associated with admitting that you have mental health crisis. So for me, it's about making sure we address the mental health, making sure we have resources on the front end, making sure we have preventative measures. How do we stop this individual from following behind his peers, his family members, or maybe even his father? Like, how do we stop that? Doing the work that I do, it's really troubling for me to see kids whom I was incarcerated with their fathers going down the exact same road. Like, it hurts me to the core, because I was always telling brothers, we have to do better and we have to find a way out. And for the most part, a lot of them didn't listen, and a lot of them are continuing that lifestyle. And now their sons are following behind them. It just takes so much life away from you, because you know at the end, ultimately, it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, man, you bring up stigma, and one of the things I bring to the table at my school's in the Heights, is breaking down stigmas of mental health and special education. So those are primarily affected by school to prison pipeline, black and brown children or students with disabilities, and LGBTQ. And so live example, happened today. A 4th grade girl comes into my office, shaking and trembling, telling me, Mr. Navas, I need to speak to you. I feel like I'm having an anxiety attack. 4th grade. I don't remember talking about no anxiety when I was in the 4th grade. Like, I didn't even know what that was, like anxiety. But kindergartners at my school know about depression, anxiety, seeking help, coming to me for whatever it is. I'm there going to every single class, teaching about social emotional learning, talking to them about resilience, talking to them about crisis in the family. Look, I tell the teachers, if you want to reach the brain, reach the heart. And one of the things is that I learned through working throughout the criminal justice in halfway houses and jails, is that one of the things they would tell me is like, Mr. Navas, man, I wish I had someone like you when I was in school. So that's where the light bulb came up into my mind. Like, I need to get into the schools then. Because there are students who are going through the same issues that adults are going through without any clue of how to even maneuver this stuff. Man, we got kids coming to school after seeing their parents going through a deep argument. And they're taking it out on their teachers, and the teachers want to take it personal. And one of the things I learned working in the jail system is, like, it's not about me. They're not screaming at me. They're screaming at their missing father, missing mother. They're screaming at the drug dealer. They're screaming at the cops. They're screaming at the blocks. They're screaming at everybody else but me. I just so happen to be in their face, so I don't take it personal. And so when it comes to school to prison pipeline, these are the things that we need to educate our teachers on. Like, not everything, like, so for example, one of the things that we do in my school, we don't go necessarily to suspensions and detentions. They don't even go to the principal's office, they come to me. Now we're processing what you went through. Let's process this. All right, you hit somebody, you cursed at someone. All right, let's talk about the root issues. What's going on? You know, because rather than go, Jesus said, you have heard it was an eye for an eye, but I tell you, when you get hit on one cheek, turn your cheek. unfortunately, too many school systems have this eye for an eye system, where if you do you do something wrong, you're automatically being held accountable at a high level of school suspension or whatever, or detention or whatever. I'm more about, let's come into my classroom, let's talk about this. Let's come into my office, let's talk about this. Because when you suspend a student, you're giving them the freedom to be home. And who knows what happens at home? Who knows even if the parent is home? What parent not every parent could stay home because my child got suspended, now I got to stay home with them. Nah, you're giving somebody freedom to not be in school, and now you're giving them the liberty to do whatever it is they want to do out in the streets or out in their homes. So that's one of the mechanisms, one of the tools that one could to use, rather than just going straight to like, now you're getting the boot, get out of here, we don't want you. Now let's talk about this. Let's process this. So going back to the mental health issues, I go to the classrooms and I talk about mental health things. They know it at an early age. At kindergarten, they're already using certain words to identify certain feelings. So when I ask them, how you feeling today? And they say, good. All right, how could you identify exactly what you're feeling right now, other than good? And you'll see, I'm actually feeling sad. All right, what happened? Why are you feeling sad? My mom and father went through it again, this, that, and so we're talking about this now. Another thing is, like I had mentioned, just educating the teachers. And this is another thing where, coming from the jail system, CEOs didn't like us as much. And I don't want to generalize it, not every CEO, but certain CEOs didn't like our style because we're actually trying to help people now. You know, we're in a program trying to truly rehabilitate you rather than storing you in a human warehouse. Like, we are literally running therapeutic groups in therapeutic communities and actually giving you incentives for participating in our group, such as family time. And CEOs are like, yo, y'all treating these people like they ain't commit no crime. Because we're looking at them as the Imago Dei. We're looking at them as human beings. So I'm bringing this into the school system like, yo, like, you got to understand, like, they're running wild because they didn't take their medication. They're not running wild because they don't like you. So these are the things that we got to talk to teachers about. And also, like, let teachers know that just like teachers go through things, so do our students. So when it comes to preventative care, these are the things we talk about in advance. Another thing is, if we want to try to do away with school to prison pipeline, man, we got to build more relationships with our youth. Like, it's different when you tell somebody who you don't know, get your feet off the desk. And when you really do know them, be like, man, get your feet off the desk. If they don't know you, they'll look at, man, who are you talking? Like, why? You're not my mom, you're not my dad, why are you talking to me like that? But when you know them, be like, yo, man, get your feet off the desk, man. You know you can't be doing that. And all right, my bad, Mr. Novice, I apologize. But you need to build a relationship with your students. And when you build a relationship with your students, you know when they're having an off day. When you know what's going on, where, look, man, education is more than 2 + 2. Because we need emotional intelligence. You know, your IQ remains the same, but your EQ changes with your life. And these are the things that we need to put our youth on, man. Like, I am passionate about this stuff. Like, I got 3 kids. I talk to these things with my own kids. The same, and I tell parents at my school, what I want for your kids, I want for my own kids. Like, so when I sit them in my office, like, because another thing is working with IEPs, individual educational plans. Another stigma that we try to break down, because parents don't want to get their kids tested because they think that if they go to a special education program, they're looked at as dumb. Like, nah, this is equity. We're putting someone who learns different at an equal playing level than others. That's what we want to do. We want to provide equity. Some people could say, oh, you got to tie your bootstraps, whatever. Man, some people don't have boots to tie their bootstraps. And we want to be able to provide these resources. So we got to talk to parents, especially minority parents who, I don't want my kids to be looked at like that. Man, it's going to be even worse. We want to provide resources. So when it comes to school to prison pipeline, man, tear down these stigmas when it comes to special education and mental health, for sure. Man, let's do, when it comes to holding students accountable, let's look at different alternative ways to be able to restore our youth. And let's process things with them. Also, man, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I'm sure, well, I don't want to assume. I know in my high school, man, there was police officers in in schools, and who are not trained, who are trained to lock people up, not trained to really work with students, or officers, right, man, how can we do away with that? And I understand there's violence going on in schools. I understand all of this. I understand. And again, like Kadi said in the beginning, we don't have all the solutions, because I'll bring up the problem, somebody else got to bring up the solution. That's why we're a team. But it's traumatizing enough when they got to see police sirens on all night long when you're driving through either MLK or Ocean or wherever. Now you got to go into school and you see a police officer there all day, and then they're the ones holding you accountable. There's youth being locked up in juvenile detention centers just for talking back at their teachers, for cursing at their teachers. Youth in detention centers. So rather than processing this with the student, they're calling the police who is in the building. Can you get the student out of my classroom? Rather than being scared of addressing it with the student and calling the police, man, talk to the student. But that comes with relationships. Also training. We got to train our teachers, man. We got to train administration. We got to train everybody in the building how to deal with different cultures. And we need diversity within the teachers. One of the things that I remember just thinking about, or reading upon during the desegregation of schools with Ruby Bridges, that although they combined black and white students in one school, they kept the white teachers in that school. They didn't combine the black and white teachers. So we need diversity. And I'm not talking about just all like tokenism, like, oh, you're black, you're brown, yeah, you can do it. Nah. And we need to be able to get well-educated teachers, well-prepared teachers who could do it. And also, I don't know, this is on a whole nother level, man. We got to pay more, man. Teachers don't get paid enough. And when you don't get paid enough, man, they're going to look for other jobs in other fields. And one of the ways that the church could get involved is stepping up into the schools and doing what they can. I remember, and I'll end with this one story, and I forgot where it is. My memory's like the worst part about me. The school where it was the fathers who were in the building, just holding it down in the building. Down south, right? Was it Louisiana or something? I don't know, somebody else. You all put it in the chat or wherever. It was the fathers that stepped up, who were hall monitors, who would give students hugs, and who would show them love. And that's what we could step in as the fathers who are not locked up. That's, if possible, when possible, to volunteer. And to, I have the privilege of working in the same school that my kids go to, so I'm always involved as a parent and as a school social worker. Like, I'm here, I'm reading books to the kids, and I'm doing whatever it needs to get done. Like, parents, let's get involved. But I could continue, but I'll stop, sorry. My bad.
Thank you. Man, it's hard not to jump in and share some other things too. I'll keep it a moderating, but I'll throw these two things out there. One, if we fund schools based on property value, and there's a homicide on a block every single year, property value ain't changing, which means the schools aren't getting funded the way they need to, and it's just cyclical over and over again. But the second thing to what you're saying about mentorship, New York Times has a decades-long study, and it's connected, obviously this issue is definitely connected to poverty and to home structures, but what they found was in terms of building equity and wealth and keeping wealth, it was more important for somebody to have a mentor figure, not even just a parent, just a single mentor figure, than actually coming from wealth. So if you took a single parent household that had a lot of money, but they didn't have the positive male and female role model, they were not likely to keep the wealth in the same way that the poor kid was if they had that mentorship. And if you're a visual learner too, they got a cool graph and it moves. And anyway, I'll send the link out for anybody interested in reading that. But moving to you, Boris, obviously we're hearing all of these issues, and we're a church obviously here, and you're part of a parachurch model of community organizing. Why is it important that we actually rally together rather than just being one guy on the corner yelling about this issue, but actually come together to address the topic like mass incarceration?
Because as much as we might be uncomfortable with some of these statistics, there are some people who are comfortable with the life they live. And I'm not vilifying anybody or anything, but they want to maintain the status quo. And they believe it's a zero-sum game. They think that if I have 100% and I create equity by giving you 50%, I'm down 50%. They don't understand it's not a zero-sum game. There's enough for everybody, right? And in terms of it being important for everybody, because when you're dealing with that type of power, people who have that type of power, it takes power to move power. And by myself, I just don't have enough power. That is the cold, hard reality of it. This world operates on power. And that's what organizing does. It teaches you to multiply your power. And I don't have to be a poster boy for it. We got historical facts. I mean, the reason that I'm able to stand here and sit up here right now, and there's, is because people organized and they got laws changed, and now I could sit on the bus in the front because I paid my fare. But that took power. And people got hurt. People got hurt, but it was that important to them because they were concerned with the next generation. And to be concerned with the next generation, you have to be an adult. That is one of the hallmarks of being an adult. Children are selfish. That's the way they're designed, right? And this is why I always say, if you arrest the development, then you originally arrest the bodies, right? Our communities are plagued with arrested development. Nobody wants to be a father. Nobody wants to be a grandfather. Nobody wants to grow up. We need people to grow up so that we can build power. Because this ain't for the kids. This fight is a hard fight. That bus boycott took 390 days, right? Some people will march for 2 weekends at best and run out of steam. But when you've grown, you can handle it. You can handle the pressure. You could work with others. You could build power. We could all come to one conclusion that we don't like this, despite whatever your background is and my background is. We know that it's in our best interest and our children's best interest to work on this to provide a better future. But you got to be grown just for that conversation, to put aside your differences, to put aside your stigmas. And you're not going, if it could be done by one person, if you had that much power, then it would be done, right? And the sad part about it is I'm listening to the conversations, right? And I'm hearing all the problems. But if you pull up a documentary from the 80s, I promise you the clothes will be different, but you'll hear the same thing. Mm-hmm. One thing is we're allowing people to name the problem that don't understand the problem, right? It's one thing, again, and I don't want to make a speculation, but Martin Luther King, life ended around the poverty campaign, right? As long as he was just fighting for black people, he made a lot of press, and I hope I'm not saying anything out of turn or being disrespectful. I'm stating some historical facts. When you start talking about poverty, you're talking about money, right? And that's going to be a problem for some people. There's some people who think that giving you something takes something away from me, and they're going to have a reaction to that. And that's where your problem is going to lie at. Because you can have children who are dealing with, and not minimizing, dealing with all kinds of issues in different areas, but you don't see the same results. Because there are people getting high and addicted in Montclair, Princeton. You can name any of the wealthy places, right? Mm-hmm. But you will never see the type of, tsunami of violence in that community. Right? B.F. Skinner said, if you give me control over an individual's environment, I can turn him into whatever I want. Something akin to what Councilman Gilmore just expressed. Mm-hmm. A lawyer, a doctor, or whatever, right? People are passing legislation and they have control over the environment, right? What resources go into them? What resources come out of them? And that's why you can socially reproduce that same thing. And then they come in with the solutions. And they give us words for it, and we swallow it. I was on a call, and someone was talking about violence in the community, and they kept talking about community policing. And I said, well, what is it? Because I was curious. It's a magic bullet, I imagine, but what is it? and this well-meaning gentleman who worked for the police force, and I'm not going to name him because it's not his fault. He couldn't name it. I said, well, what is, he said, I don't know. It means a lot of different things. This thing that we're going to apply that is going to fix stuff, you don't even know what it is? And I said, let me help you. Are we doing community policing in the Heights? No. So what are we talking about? We're talking about policing poor people. You police poor people with jobs. I've had people in my family were complete jerks until they hit the picket. And they turned into weekend philanthropists. Because they had enough, at least for a weekend. You know, you're going to come in and you're going to give another $100 million to the cops to police these poor people instead of saying, give it to the poor people. They put billions of dollars into that 96 crime bill. Why didn't you just put that money back into the community? You could build infrastructure. I should know that guy under that hard hat. He should be my neighbor. Give those jobs to the community, and I guarantee you, you'll drive down crime. When people look at me to say, you've changed, no, my situation has changed. I'm a lot nicer than I was when I was poor. I was angry all the time. I could go off in a New York minute because I was stressed out anyway. And it started from a kid. When you're in the second grade and your friend says, hey, can I come to your house? Automatically I have anxiety. You can't come to my house. Have you seen the way I'm living? As soon as you open the door, the food's on the back porch because the electricity's off. So we're keeping the food cold outside. And we're keeping the house warm by keeping the oven on. I have pants on the radiator. I may go to school with tiger stripes. This may become an issue for me. I haven't eaten all day. My fight or flight has been activated 12 times before I got to the school. I'm not even in a learning state. And then if the teacher takes my behavior and doesn't understand what's going on for me, she doesn't understand I'm dealing with trauma. That's why I have an exaggerated response. But if I was a soldier who had come from a war, you wouldn't misinterpret my behavior. You would say, that soldier's dealing with trauma. But because they don't understand that, they'll say, he has an attitude problem. Maybe he needs behavior modification. Okay, so the world pinched me, I yelled, and you want to modify the yelling? Not the pinch? Some of the stuff, even when all these words and stuff, we make it so complicated with the analyzing. Give people their fair share. Try to operate in an equitable space. We will not stomp out a lot of some of these other issues, but we can definitely drive down our prison population. We can make people safer by simply just giving people their fair share. We don't need this many billionaires. Jersey City is the tale of two cities. It's not the tale of two cities. You can't swallow that. It's one city that devalues a certain amount of people who live in a certain space. And that's the only story there is. There ain't no two stories. It's one story. It's a value gap. Some people think that their life is more valuable than other people's lives. That's the story. Someone will hand you a narrative and you'll operate in that way, and by the time you figure out the fix is in, it's too late. You got to depend on the next generation. I can observe it and I see it, and I don't need nobody to tell me. I don't need no community policing. I guarantee you, you can put all the community policing you want, go down the street, talk to people, introduce yourself, and you ain't gonna drive down nothing. They tried it in the 80s. Doing more of what don't work, don't work. We're gonna do that again? That doesn't make any sense to me. Give people jobs. When you have money to come in, put money into the schools. We have, on March 7th, we're doing an action. We fought as Jersey City together to get a fully funded budget, right? When I tell people I work in Jersey City and they don't have water in the schools, they look at me like I'm lying. They think that's a third world country. How could you not have water in the schools? Right? But we all understand what happens when you don't get enough water, right? We all understand, We have laws, hierarchy of needs. I mean, we have all this education and all of these smart people who can't figure out anything, when all you got to do is give people their fair share, and then we can start working from that space. You know, so, and again, I want people to join on to that March 7th, because we do need everybody. I'll put up some posts on New Jersey Together link, and it's not a pitch. You're gonna need everybody. If your children are in the school and your children are thirsty, then you should be on that call. Because that's when people get the picture, because they say, oh, a lot of people are concerned about this. And they have enough power to get rid of people who don't want to do things about it. Can we just say our children deserve water? Some stuff is just so simple.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts, but I'll swallow them. All right, I'll say it. As a licensed center at my job, we have to do water testing. But there is in big print on the paper, if you're in a school, you are exempt. There's a problem that if we have a double standard, because we know schools can't pass it for a basic necessity of water. But I'll leave it there. I don't want to get myself in too much trouble. But we have too many social media warriors who like to use the hashtag, post a few times. I think they've solved the issue. But obviously, we need to do more than that. So, Councilman, how do we respond locally? And how do we, as elected officials, respond as well to these problems?
Say that again?
How do we, as the community, respond to the issues, more than just obviously reposting or using a hashtag? And then how do we either hold our elected officials accountable to respond, or as elected officials, how should we expect them to respond to these types of issues?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Well, the number one thing you can tell about any administration anywhere is you look at where they allocate money, right? They prioritize what they deem necessary by putting money wherever it should go. So I come from the community activism world, and my ideology is simple. You fund social service programs. You fund what we consider simple and the right initiatives. To be fair, it's not that Jersey City don't have water. They don't have clean drinking water. That should be criminal. The number one necessity, something as natural that we take for granted, water. I have water right here for free, courtesy of the panel in the church. And it's a shame that a child at its most vulnerable age don't have access to this. Don't have access to this. Forget the fact that most of the kids don't have food when they go home. Most of the kids don't have safe environments that they're going home to. You're going to an entity that that's supposed to be properly funded, and they don't have clean drinking water. That is mind-boggling to me. So, as people who elected people, you have all the power. You have the power to not appoint, but to remove. Just like you elected them in, you can choose not to vote for them the next time. But in a political world, people have circumstantial memory. They remember what happened due to the circumstance. And politicians bank on the level of rage going away. This is why there's not too much controversy in election years. They tend to stay away from it. But these are 4-year terms. You remember the elected official for what they've done or lack thereof. And then you hold them accountable and you hold them to task. It's 2022 and we're fighting about school funding. We know the number one common denominator Well, in case you don't know, I'll let the cat out the bag. The number one common denominator amongst every individual incarcerated is what? Education. Education. Two things I learned about college and prison. For the most part, everybody in prison ain't going to college. Everybody in college ain't going to prison. There's a direct correlation between incarceration and education. The average inmate in New Jersey state prisons can't read or write on grade level. I thought that was a lie when I first read that in the law library, because I took for granted that I had my high school diploma. I just took for granted that all of the other brothers inside there knew how to read and write on grade level. I was stunned. I mean, I've seen it in movies, but to see it in real life, people can't read or write. Teachers are the number one determining factor if a child is going to enter the criminal justice system. They have more influence than your parents. Literally, more influence than your parent. In fact, some teachers are around you more than your parent. Some parent got to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Your child go to school from 8, depending on how many programs they in. They might be in there to 5 o'clock. It's a whole work shift and overtime that they're in the school or in the school environment, that they're seeing that teacher. Most kids only see their parents when they sleep because of parents had to work multiple jobs and so much things that's going on in the community. So teachers are the number one. They're number one. I'll give you a quick story, right? I was in special education classes. I stopped enjoying school. I checked out of school in the 3rd grade. Miss Ronine was my 3rd grade teacher. Everything after the 3rd grade, I checked out. I wasn't necessarily really mad at the teachers. I just was mad at my circumstance. I didn't like my circumstance, right? So when I went to school, I wasn't being rebellious. I wasn't, doing this on purpose. It's just that I had so much anger built up in me, I didn't know how to let it out. I didn't know how to articulate it. So from 4th to about 11th grade, I was in special education classes, to one teacher set me down and she said, "You can do this. You're not going to tell me, don't rush to do this. I want you to sit here, do it, and take your time." She took it a step further. She said, "Let's do a couple problems together." And that's all the insurance that I needed right there, is that someone believed in me. And because of that teacher, I started to value education more. I placed out of special education classes in the end of my junior and the beginning of my senior year, only because of the way she intervened with me. That was the only reason I did it, because she believed in me and she told me, "You can do this." Teachers are extremely influential. Extremely influential. And I have a lot of teacher friends, and part of me is telling them that they need to do more, and then part of me feels sorry for them, because the teacher got to be the principal, the therapist, the parent, the teacher. They got to be so many things. So to your point about them being underpaid, they're drastically underpaid. They're drastically underpaid. But teachers are the tilting. They going to either tilt you either way. Either they're going to push you there or they're going to stray you away from there. And it's a huge issue, and we have to address schools being properly, for God's sake, these kids are going to be making decisions when we are senior citizens. I want them educated.
Me too.
Exactly.
Once again, thank you to everybody online. Feel free to drop comments. We'll have some time to hear your comments in a little bit. But I want to shift gears a little bit to more of just a group question that I'll throw out there and then jump in and answer it. And we've already kind of talked about this, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions or stigmas attached to mass incarceration? That you either hear from people or what keeps people from even wanting to talk about it or address it or motivated to respond to this issue?
I think one of the biggest stigmas to mass incarceration is that people just take for granted that whoever's in jail is supposed to be there. They had to do something wrong. They should be there. And then the conversation changed when, see, that's what, for me, I always try to get in the business of what's right and what's wrong versus who's right and who's wrong, because you tend to be more biased when you're talking about who as opposed to the situation. So, case in point, the war on drugs, the 96 crime bill, was huge. And on the surface, it seems like a good initiative. We don't want drugs in our community. Let's clean it up. But when a certain demographic starts to consume drugs and the overdose rates go off the roof, now we have to treat drugs as a mental health illness.
You could say white people started using opioids. I got you.
You know,
I'll say it.
Now we have to treat drugs as a mental. Wait, you just said lock everybody up. Now is it like, which one is it? And that's because people are looking at who's being affected instead of what is right and what is wrong. You have to be fair, for it to be a transparent and a process that works for everybody. You have to look at what's right and what's wrong. You just have to do that. If not, we're going to constantly keep getting ourselves in trouble. So to your point, the biggest stigma associated with individuals being incarcerated is that people just take for granted that they're supposed to be there. I'm going to tell you this. I've been to almost every state, several countries. I'm an elected official. I'm a college graduate. I have a very strong circle of educated individuals. Some of the smartest individuals I met was incarcerated. Some of the smartest individuals I've met in my life were incarcerated. These are real people who made some unfortunate decisions, who was in some unfortunate circumstance. At the end of the day, you inhale and exhale just how they inhale and exhale, right? So for me, that's the biggest stigma. I mean, of course, there's some people who rightfully deserve to be incarcerated for the crimes they've committed. We're not saying, so that's why I'm not one to essentially say, like, abolish it. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if you're gonna have something, have jail. What happens to rehabilitation? That's what it was for. You send them away to get help, to get intervention. If you take them and you just sit them there, you could send somebody to jail for 25 years, and if they have no enrichment, they'll come home and do the exact same thing. Right? You have to rehabilitate people while they are incarcerated, so when they come home, they become productive citizens in society.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I've come across is they'll, just if they're innocent, they'll just go to court. But they can't even afford a lawyer or an attorney. They got to get a public defender who eats lunch with the judge and the prosecutor, right? They go to each other's kids' birthday parties. I remember one time years ago, I got a disorderly conduct thing. And I went to the whatever, I'm not gonna get an attorney for disorderly conduct. So I went to public defender. He's like, all right, so yeah, you're gonna plead guilty to this. I'm like, hold up, but I didn't even do anything. Like, hear me out first. Like, hear what I got to say. So not everybody has an opportunity to fight their case. And there's a misconception that, you do the crime, do the time. But some of them didn't even do the crime, and some of them are doing the time without even acknowledging, even going to court, man. It's like you're in holding. Just holding in itself, you're there with just for whatever reason, and without the even opportunity to plead your case, or you gotta go to whatever, echo pod, these pods, pod this, block this, up in the jail, and now you're in a cell like, man, I didn't even do it, like, I wasn't even the one, bro, you know what I mean? So it's like, that misconception that they are criminals, or they should have just done something else with their life. Not everybody has the same opportunities.
As you're afforded.
Yeah. Not everybody has the same opportunities, man. Sticking with the education, not everybody had the same educational opportunity. Not everybody had the opportunity to get a teacher who knows what they're doing, who is not there for their paycheck, or not that it's good, but is there because they know what they're doing. Not everybody had, it's crazy because not even everybody has an opportunity to drink water in school. That's right. So that's just one side, but not everybody had the same opportunities. So let's think about that. Because one district may have an opportunity, the other district may not. So that just, there's a misconception that you should have just done something else with your life. You got to understand that some people are put in situations that they're willing to risk their freedom for what they think is the good, for what they feel is what they need to do for their family. I could wake up early and I could go to work. Some people don't have that opportunity, and some people are not afraid to go back to prison for the sake of their kids. And as wild as that may seem, because then others will say, well, if they love their kids so much, then why don't they stay home? That's the point. That's how wild it is, that they seem like they have no other option. Man, and when you're talking about the smartest people you met, man, it takes a lot of knowledge to be able to read a case. Not everybody could sit down and read a whole case and then read other cases to compare your case with, to go back to the Lord, to the attorneys or to the judge, say, according to this statute in this case, this is why I should not be locked up. It takes some smart individuals to be able to work their case out. So no, not everybody in jail is not educated. They may not have gone to educated places, if not, and not all, but not everybody is uneducated who is in the jail system. Some really, and if they did commit, some people are really, look, man, some people out in the streets who are engineers, who chemists, who entrepreneurs, and they're intelligent human beings out there, man. So that's a misconception that I've heard a lot.
Absolutely, and I want to add one thing to what you said about opportunities. A great book to read a little bit more about that is Professor Eddie Cloud Jr. from Princeton University. He coined that phrase, opportunity desert. I'm not the author of that. Some places just don't have opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. And he called them opportunity deserts. He also coined the phrase value gap. That's where I got that, reading that book. It's a great book to read. And
can you drop that title one more time? And author?
Democracy in Black. Yeah, by Professor Eddie Cloud Jr. It's a great book to read, and it has some great lectures online. But also, just to say about even the thing about right or wrong, right? Which is weird for me, right? Because we place such a moral halo over the courts that we think the courts are operating in the moral space. We're in the moral space now. You understand what I'm saying? And here's why I say that. I came up with a plan because I was poor, right? So it wasn't whether I was right or wrong in morality. I said, I don't have any money, so I'm poor, I'm at a financial disadvantage, so I'm going to sell weed, right? And I started to sell weed. And I was chased over gates and everything. This was illegal, right? They would arrest me for this. And now here it is. I'm in my 40s, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching the TV, and I see this politician say, the country's at a financial disadvantage. We're going to sell weed. We're going to make it legal. And I'm like, I thought of the same thing at 13. And he locked me up. You see what I'm saying? So right or wrong is more about legality. This happened with Italians, right? That group got vilified for the sales of alcohol, right? All the other behavioral byproducts that follow the violence and stuff comes with poverty. That comes with it. You can go anywhere. I don't care what the race is. A bunch of poor people, it could really turn into a situation, right? Especially if you have something and I have nothing. It could really get hairy, right? But they were vilified, and then what did he do? He locked up a bunch of these people, and then he made the sale of alcohol legal. I got a ticket for selling dice, for shooting dice on the corner. And then they made it legal. But was I morally wrong? Or was I adapted to my situation? I came up with the same brilliant plan as the politicians. So that's why when I say, sometimes I'm listening to things and I'm like, that's odd. You know why? You know why I can see it this way? Because I was educated by a man who did not go to school. Now this might sound weird, so you gotta be careful, and I'm gonna be careful. Schools are about academia. They give you the academic tools to access an education. It's not an education. Mark Twain said, don't let school get in the way of your education. I was educated by a simple man who would always say, that doesn't make any sense. That's all he had to know. That don't make no sense. The Socratic method, a systematic critique of assumptions, will bring about a clear expression of the truth known to all rational beings. Let's investigate this. Let's just think about this. Right? So you have poor people who are fending for themselves because they have been marginalized, left outside of the pages of the legislation, and then locked up, thrown in jail, right? Do you know that all of the applications that in New Jersey, I just got the staggering results, right? To open these weed dispensaries were denied. Now that it's legal, they come from impacted communities, and I'm using language for these applications, right? You know, not that I've applied, but I'm using language, right? But I could sell it on the corner and get chased. But I know it's going to be $1 billion industry, but I'm being locked out again. You see, you got to be very careful with the spin in the medias and stuff. They give us language. We're already smart people. Just be practical. You could ask a kid and they'll tell you that's not fair. That's just not fair. And one of the biggest stigma about people in prison is you think they don't know this. You think they're not practical. You think they're stupid. They've done something that's not logical. It's not logical, but psychologically it balanced my equilibrium. I actually feel better. That's all I got in a world that doesn't allow me to access things and have a certain quality of life and experience upward mobility. I mean, just in the last year or so, I've learned what the security of not having to worry about bills felt like. One day I was just driving and I was like, oh wow, I'm not worried. I had been under pressure for so long, I thought it was normal. That's all I knew was pressure. That was a regular feeling to me. I've been under so long that I never knew there was another feeling like, when I paid the rent, I was already worried about the 30 days. I was worrying 30 days down the road. I stayed in a state of panic and anxiety. And how am I supposed to interact with people in the world in this state? I'm sure I'm gonna make a mistake. A cop rolled behind me for about a mile. With all that anxiety, I'm looking at him like, of course I'm gonna make a mistake. I mean, I just pulled over, like, what's going on? He said, I'm not trying to, bother you at night or anything. You really? You've been following me for about a mile. I don't even have the blood pressure medication for this. I'm a nervous wreck. I pulled over. What's going on? Oh, no, I thought I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Looked like you rolled the stop sign back there. I literally laughed at him, too. It was like, he just said, go ahead. Because I was like, really, my man? I'm just trying to go home. This is the level of anxiety you're dealing with when you're being black in America. And then I have to worry about, women don't have time. We got this new thing called single parents, and everybody went for it. Now we got a single parent. We popularized that so much, we destroyed the one thing, and I'm speaking specifically for black people. The one thing that made us as strong as we were was we had family. Then they took welfare, said, give us the man, we'll give you a check. Divided the family. And they said on top of that, look like these guys have a community. Spread them out. You don't have a community now. You got to import people for a march. Half of the people don't even live in the community no more. You took Section 8, take the man out of his comfort space, right? So you move your family, your girlfriend gets a voucher, she moves to Plainsboro, and then you get racially profiled, right? You cut off from your resources. Eventually you leave the family because you're trying to survive. I'm making the best out of the choices that are left. And for me, I'm like, I'm not gonna explain it. I lived it. It's a whole system that conspires to keep people in a certain class. And it happens to be black and brown people. It's been other people who've been under systems as well. That's just the way that things are operating. And unless you, and if you want to break down a wall or a system, you're going to need a lot of people to do it. And the thing is this, I don't want to have to go through ideologies of how, let's just say, this date is correct, right? It's correct. Do we want to do something about them? Let's do it. I watched a 70% recidivism rate from prison, right? Under the banner of corrections. Which means that you guys are doing a horrible job, right? That means you have a 30% success rate. You couldn't be a college coach with a 30% success rate, and these guys got promoted. You couldn't be a high school coach. I don't need an education for that one. A kid could tell you that's not right. That doesn't seem right at all. This guy's horrible. He's trash. That's what they would say. They say he's trash.
That's a New York Jets level performance right there.
Oh, boy.
I'm a Jets fan. I'm always feeling
I just wanted to say, man, you guys mentioned two things. You mentioned Section 8, and earlier you had mentioned social services. And one would say, but why can't somebody who's coming out of jail get the help they need? Man, you don't qualify. You can't get every social service. You can't get certain things, certain assistance once you come out. Because, that's it. Some felonies, you got convictions, and that's another, misconception that some may have. Why don't they just get the help they need that are out there? They can't, they can't even go use a certain address for parole. And so it becomes a cycle. That's the problem. And then they're getting locked up for charges that it's like that should not even stick or whatever. That has to do with mass incarceration. So I think those are the stigmas, those are the stereotypes, those are the issues that happen when it comes to social services. And I remember people trying to get paroled. They give that address and it gets denied. It gets denied because it's in the housing or it's in whatever. It's something that it's government provided or whatever. So now they got to stay longer at the halfway house and prolong the opportunities. Some people they'll set up connections while in jail and or prison. And all right, once I touch down, that's it. I have a job. But wait, now my parole officer's sending me to another program, which is great. But this program is now giving me a 60-day stop that I can't leave this program for 30 days, 60 days to the job that I have set up for me that will help me get the place that I need to live at to help me provide for my family. But now I got to wait 60 days in a time where people are looking for jobs. During that time I was working there, by the time my 60 days are up, that's it. Job is done. I can't work there anymore. So even with opportunities that they find themselves, sometimes there's certain barriers that are placed that they're not able to receive those benefits.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a final stigma to just kind of put a bow on it, and you guys have touched on it, is the mental health and addiction element. We just assume people are serving this time. Well, they must have been selling drugs. That's what their charge was. No, they were addicted to drugs. They didn't have enough to be selling. They were buying that for themselves to get their fix. And sometimes those very addicted people have very serious mental health issues, and they can't afford the meds, they can't get to the meds, and so they turn to alternatives. One topic that's growing within mass incarceration that hasn't been addressed, but I want to throw it out here to the group, is the role of ICE and the demonization of immigrants in connected to mass incarceration. So we see with bail reform, we see with trying to lower mandatory minimums, all of a sudden beds open up, and when you have a private prison system, that's cash that you're losing, and so we got to fill those beds some way, and it seems to have turned towards this demographic. And so what's the role of ICE and this demonization of immigrants that's always been around but seems to have been rekindled in the last 4 or 5 years due to certain political individuals who I won't name because it gets me in trouble with white evangelicals. Floor is yours, panel.
Well, one thing I could say is that the federal government pays for beds. So some of these prisons, not all of them, some of them have contracts, and they have to keep those beds filled, right? And then there came this explosion of places like Tabor Hall, and not picking them, I'm saying all these different halls popped up, right? Tabor Hall, Bo Robinson's, all these things because now we got to start putting people in places because there were articles where individuals had actually been killed in one of those spaces who were just in there for tickets, right? But they were so busy trying to clear out that population because now we could sell the bed for more money, right? And ICE is just become, and I'm not going to say the whole thing is money, but you always got to find there's going to be some money involved, right? And now that you have this vested interest in chasing down this population who's always been here, all of a sudden they've become a problem, right? You know, for me, I got an old ear and stuff. I hear stuff is like, what are we gonna do about the Negro problem, right? So then somebody come up with some legislation, right? So now something's become a problem, and we have to figure out how we can solve it. But it's funny, there's always a price tag attached to it, right? Mm-hmm. Someone's always making a bunch of money off of it, you know? And now it seems as that you have this population of people that you're just chasing down and kicking down their doors, and they're vulnerable. They're a vulnerable group. A lot of them can't scream out about the injustices. You know, a lot of things that happen to people who are dealing with ICE, they can't protect themselves. They won't speak up. We organize around housing. Landlords treat them horribly because they figured it, who are you going to tell? I'll call ICE. It has to be somebody in your family. Maybe I could make your life uncomfortable, right? People are getting paid under the table, not getting a fair wage because they're vulnerable, right? That's what it says. Always different populations who could wind up in this vulnerable space, right? And people take advantage of them in order to maintain their status quo. You know, so that in terms of that mass incarceration population, as we start looking at reform, whatever that means, and they start doing all this, like my brother says, finagling the bagel, right? When they start doing all of this, you gotta watch. See, I'm really, you know, I just happened to be born in a space that was very complicated, and you had to have your wits about you to navigate it, right? So I always look for the hook. You know, it's just like a guy doing a trick with tops. You're looking like, where's the hook? There has to be a hook, right? That's where I come from. So I usually look for the money. Who's gaining? Who has something to gain for this, right? And can these people fend for themselves? No. Mm-hmm. You get taken advantage of in a space like that. You know, that's basically, you know, how I see this new population of people that's being hunted.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, when I think of demonize, you know, that you're taking away the humanity of an individual. And it's often what being incarcerated does to individuals. It takes away the humanity. And that's not what God designed us to lose, man. We are all created, regardless of whoever you are, whatever crime you commit, or if you didn't commit a crime, whoever, we are made in God's image and likeness. So look at to demonize an immigrant because of because of how they came into this country. I mean, I'm not one to speak for God, but I could only imagine God being hurt by that. I'm not talking for God. I'm not telling you God said, nah, man, God is a father, and if I know one of my children is being demonized for a better opportunity, I'm going to be hurt. And we look at immigrants, and they're willing to risk their lives for a better opportunity. They're willing to die in the waters of Rio Grande before dying in their streets, being killed by either their government or by the whoever's out there in their communities, man. I had a cousin who was stopped trying to cross over, and he was telling me, he's in El Salvador. He's telling me, man, I need to get out of here. I need a better opportunity. There are no opportunities for me here. You know, and then to risk their life to come over to this country.
It's just for that word. When people came to the Americas through those waters, they called them settlers. You gotta be careful when they give you these words. They're calling Mexicans immigrant when Texas was part of Mexico. They were here first. It's such a weird thing for me to hear. Excuse me, because that's a vulnerable population for me. Illegal immigrants. Once you do that, you've stolen their humanity when you say immigrant. It's a human being. It's a vulnerable population, but they're human beings. Americans came over here. You know, we come to the Americas as the story is told, but they were called settlers. So allow these settlers to cross the border and come make this a greater space or whatever it is. You know. I'm sorry. That word was just difficult for me.
Yeah, I just think that, man, rather than being quick to put them to detain them, is there any other pathway for them? I don't have the answers, but is there any other pathway towards citizenship if that's what they're looking for? You know, not everybody has an opportunity to get papers while they're in their country to come into this country. You know, some people they risk their kids, man. They risk their whole lives. They risk it all. They put everything in a plastic bag, whatever they need, cross that river or however it is they cross, you know, and they risk it all, man. The things that women go through, I've heard stories of the rapes that women have to go through, you know, just to come over. I know one friend came at 16 years old, man, left Mexico, knew nothing, knew nobody, but came for a better opportunity. You know, now he's in his 30s, ended up selling his house, married with kids. He's not here to try to take nobody's job. He's trying to get a job. You know, if nobody else wants it, he's going to take it. And you know, and I think, and I understand that there's financial gains towards certain individuals with ICE and detainees, man, but they're looking for some financial gains themselves. Let them live. There's enough for all of us to live, man. So, yeah.
We could go down a whole rabbit hole on just the immigration issue with mass incarceration, because in the way that you're entitled to a lawyer, you're not entitled to a lawyer with immigration. You can murder literally dozens of people. You get to sit in the courtroom with your loved one. If you're an immigrant, you have to sit in a different room and be videoed in. And most of the charges are related to paperwork, and there's mostly no opportunity for bail. And so people are sitting for years in prison awaiting, not because they committed a crime. If they committed a crime, they would be in Gen Pop. But all right, we got to wrap it up. People are ready to go home soon, I'm sure. But I just wanted to see if there was an opportunity for any questions online, if Pastor Lipa wants to text me, or any questions in the room that's been burning on anybody, if they want to share. If not, I had one last wrap up, which is I'll give you 1 minute. So I'll tell you got 30 seconds because y'all will talk for 3 minutes each. But I know the struggle, right? Anytime a pastor says he's closing, you got 20 minutes. Get comfy. So, but one final thought, if we forget everything that was just discussed over the last hour plus, what is one final thing you want us to walk away with related to this topic? We'll start with the best looking to the ugliest. So, no, I'm just kidding. You started talking first. I guess you're the best looking.
I mean, I guess the biggest takeaway is that when we're talking about this topic and we're talking about these numbers, these are real people. These are real people that we're talking about. And a lot of times, see, I judge people based on what they did and the circumstance they was in, right? It's easy to do good when a circumstance is facilitated for you to do good, right? So for me, I'm not so caught up on what crime you committed. I'm also caught up, why did you commit the crime? What were contributing factors to you committing this crime? Because if I don't know what the contributing factors is, if I don't know why you did it, then I can't help you rectify the behavior. So that's what I would say the biggest and also we have to destigmatize individuals who encounter the criminal justice system. Because quiet as it's kept, if truth be told, there are some people who never encountered the criminal justice system who've done worse than people who've actually encountered the criminal justice system.
1,000%.
I would just say, man, love your neighbor. I said, if you love your neighbor, you get to know who they are. You get to help your neighbor. You get to be there for your neighbor. Build a relationship with your neighbor. And then who your neighbor is, you know, it's the least of these. It's the least of these. You know, your physical neighbor, whoever, reach out, man. We all going through something. Man, everybody's going through something. If not today, maybe tomorrow. If not today, you probably went through it yesterday. Just get to love your neighbor, get to know your neighbor, man. That's it. Just love your neighbor.
And I guess that's why I went last. I knew when you said handsome, I was like, this guy's got me beat. But I'm smart. So, but if there's anything I would leave people with is that the criminal justice system is a system that conspires to maintain the status quo and to keep, you know, it's always going to be a poor side of town, no matter where you go. And it's going to always be the same side, right? So, and it's going to be, the, you know, black and brown people. It's a system that conspires together. And if you want to disrupt it, because this system affects housing, education, and all the other things that we hold near and dear to our heart. So if you want to tackle it, get with people who have like minds, organize, and I'll leave it with the Ethiopian proverb that I love is that when spiders unite, they could tie down a lion. So collectively, we could tackle this.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. So grateful for your time. I want to invite Pastor Lipe. He's going to give us our closing remarks and closing prayer.
We have a question from the audience.
Oh, we got a question from the audience?
Oh.
I see that hand. No. We got a question? Don't mess with me.
Hold on, we do got it. Hold up. We have a late
Go
bloomer
ahead.
question.
Before we go, where can everyone follow you and keep up with what each of you are doing?
Oh, yeah. Where can they follow you, find you? Home address, social security number, banking routing number.
Look, man, all I got is my family and kids on my Instagram page. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's CR Navas.
I think so.
Right,
I think
man? Yeah, trust me, I have nothing to offer. When it comes to social media, I have nothing to offer, but I'm there.
You can follow me on all social media platforms at Educational Gilmore.
You'll be a better follower. You'll be a better follower than you would for me.
And you can follow me on all platforms at, I guess, Boris Franklin. Everything's under that name. And also New Jersey Together. We have a web page, and we also have a social media page.
Yeah, thank you guys. You can find me on social media, DS Carment. if you want to see adorable pictures of my son and his full flowing hair. So I got one final quote, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Lipe. It says this: "The poor tell us who we are. The prophets tell us who we can be. So we hide the poor and we kill the prophets." Philip Berrigan. Pastor Lipe.
Thank you again. Carlos, Mr. Gilmore, thank you so much, Boris as well, and Pastor Dave for being in the discussion. I just want to thank you, all of you that were online with us, and really for those that continue to view this, we pray that you connect with us. We're here to serve you, and every Sunday at 10 a.m. from your home or here in person, 324 Communipo. And let me just pray us out as we end today. God, we want to thank you for the blessing of just coming together. We thank you for this conversation. We take action. I heard so many good things today, and the summary sounds like, let's take action in education for our kids. Let's take action, and maybe we cannot save the world, but we could mean the world for one person. And today, Lord, I pray that you help us to continue to work together to do this for you, God, and may every system that is built on greed and evil, God, that will be dismantled, and may your kingdom, Lord, and in your justice roll like a river. We pray these things, traveling mercies wherever we go, and we thank you, God, for this moment. In your name, amen.